Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are moving on to Volume 3 of Emerson's journals. We are up to Journal Collection number 24, which begins at C, it says, in January 2nd of 1833, and Emerson at this time is age 29. And with that said, I will go ahead and get started. Sailed from Boston for Malta, December 25th, 1832, in brig Jasper, Captain Ellis, 236 tons, laden with logwood, mahogany, tobacco, sugar, coffee, beeswax, cheese, etc. A long storm from the second morn of our departure consigned all the 5 passengers to the irremediable chagrins of the stateroom, to wit, nausea, darkness, unrest, uncleanness, harpy appetite and harpy feeding, and ugly quote-unquote sound of waters in mine ears, anticipations of going to the bottom, and the treasures of the memory. I remembered up nearly the whole of Lycidas, clause by clause, here a verse and there a word, as Isis in the fable, the broken body of Osiris. Out occasionally crawled we from our several holes, but hope in fair weather would not, so there was nothing for it but to wriggle again into the crooks of the transom. Then it seemed strange that the first man who came to sea did not turn round and go straight back again. Strange that, because one of my neighbors had some trumpery logs and notions which would sell for a few cents more here than there, he should thrust forth this company of his poor countrymen to the tender mercies of the northwest wind. We studied the sailor, the man of his hands, man of all work, all eye, all finger, muscle, skill, and endurance, a tailor, a carpenter, cooper, stevedore, and clerk, and astronomer besides. He is a great saver, and a great quiddle by the necessity of his situation. The captain believes in the superiority of the American to every other countryman. You will see, he says, when you get out here, how they manage in Europe. They do everything by main strength and ignorance. 4 truckmen and 4 stevedores at Long Wharf will load my brig quicker than 100 men at any port in the Mediterranean. It seems the Sicilians have tried once or twice to bring their fruit to America in their own bottoms, and made the passage, he says, in 120 days. A crop of meditations in the berth. Thought again of the sailor, and how superficial the differences. How shallow to make much of mere coat and hat distinctions. You can't get away from the radical, uniform, interior experiences which peep out of the new faces, identical with those of the old. New tongues repeat the old proverbs, primeval truths. The thought occurred, full of consolation, that if he would deal towards himself with severest truth, man must acknowledge the deity. So far from being a conventional idea, built on reason of state, it is in strict soliloquy and absolute solitude when the soul makes itself a hermit in the creation, that this thought naturally arises. This unavoidable acknowledgment of God, this valid prayer, puts the soul in equilibrium. In this state the question whether your boat shall float in safety or go to the bottom is no more important than the flight of a snowflake. January 3rd. I rose at sunrise, and under the lee of the Spencer sheet had a solitary thoughtful hour. All right thought is devout. The clouds were touched, and in their silent faces might be read unutterable love. They shone with light that shines on Europe, Afric, and the Nile, and I opened my spirit's ear to their most ancient hymn. What, they said to me, goest thou so far to seek? Painted canvas, carved marble, renowned towns? But fresh from us, new evermore, is the creative efflux from whence these works spring. You now feel in gazing at our fleecy arc of light the motions that express themselves in arts. You get no nearer to the principles in Europe. It animates man. It is the America of America. It spans the ocean like a handbreadth. It smiles at time and space. Yet welcome, young man. The universe is hospitable. The great God, who is love, hath made you aware of the forms and breeding of his wide house. We greet you well to the place of history, as you please to style it, to the mighty Lilliput or ant hill of your genealogy, if, instructed as you have been, you must still be the dupe of shows and count it much, the 3 or 4 bubbles of foam that precede your own on the sea of time. This strong-winged seagull and striped shearwater that you have watched as they skim the waves under our vault, they are works of art better worth your enthusiasm, masterpieces of eternal power, strictly eternal because now active, and ye need not go so far to seek what ye would not seek at all, if it were not within you. Yet welcome and hail. So sang my ear the silvery grey mists, and the winds and the sea said, Amen. Thursday, January 3rd, North latitude 37 degrees 53. Dr. Johnson rightly defends conversation upon the weather. With more reason we at sea beat that topic then. We are pensioners of the wind. The weathercock is the wisest man. All our prosperity, enterprise, temper, come and go with the fickle air. If the wind should forget to blow, we must eat our masts. Sea farmers must make hay when the sun shines. The gale collects plenty of work for the calm. Now we are all awaiting a smoother sea to stand at our toilet. A headwind makes grinning Esau's of us. Happy that there is time for all things under the moon, so that no man need give a dinner party in a brig's cabin, nor shave himself by the Gulf lightning. Saturday evening, January 5th. I like the latitude of 37 degrees better than my bitter native 42 degrees. We have sauntered all this calm day at 1 or 2 knots the hour, and nobody on board well pleased but I. And why should I be pleased? I have nothing to record. I have read little. I have done nothing. What then? Need we be such barren scoundrels that the whole beauty of heaven, the main and man, cannot entertain us, unless we too must needs hold a candle and daub God's world with a smutch of our own insignificance? Not I, for one. I will be pleased, though I do not deserve it. I will act an all up to my conceit of last week, when I exulted in the power and art with which we rode tilting over this January ocean, albeit, to speak truth, our individual valors lay very sick, the while, lodged each in the waistcoat pocket of the brave brig's transom, so that each passenger's particular share in the glory was much the same as the sutler's or grocer's who turns his penny in the army of Leonidas or Washington. The southing latitude does not yet make early mornings. The steward's lanthorn and the trumpery matutinal preparations are to me for the rosy ray, the silver cloud or chant of earliest bird, but days will come. Poor book, this Scelta di Goldoni. He is puffed in the preface, and also by Sismondi, as the restorer or reformer of the Italian stage, etc., etc. Not a just sentiment or a well-contrived scene in the book. His highest merit, that of a good phrase book. Perrin might as well knit his conversations into a dialogue and call it a drama. Sunday, January 6th, latitude 37 degrees 23, longitude 39 degrees 59 west. Last evening, fair wind and full moon suddenly lost in squall and rain. There are no attractions in the sailor's life. Its best things are only alleviations. A prison with the chance of being drowned. It is even so, and yet they do not run blind into unmeasured danger, as seems to the landsman. These chances are all counted and weighed, and experience has begotten this confidence in the proportioned strength of spars and rigging to the ordinary forces of wind and water, which, by being habitual, constitutes the essence of a sailor's fearlessness. Suppose a student confined to a ship, I see not why he might trim his lamp to as good purpose as in college attic. Why should he be less efficient in his vocation than the poor steward who ingloriously deals ever in pork and beans? Let the quadrant or the chart or the monsoon say what they will, the caboose is his Rome. It occurred forcibly this morning, whether suggested by Goldoni or Bigelow, or some falsetto of my own, that the thing set down in words is not affirmed. It must affirm itself, or no forms of grammar and no verisimilitude can give it evidence. This is a maxim which holds to the core of the world. Storm, storm, ah we, the sea to us is but a lasting storm. We have had no fine weather to last an hour, yet I must thank the sea and rough weather for a truckman's health and stomach, how connected with celestial gifts. The wind is the sole performer in these parts of nature, and the royal Aeolus understands his work well, and to give him his due, shifts the scenes and varies the accompaniment as featly and as often as the audience can desire. Certainly he rings his few chimes with wondrous skill of permutation. Sometimes we, his pets, are cross, and say 'tis naught but salt and squalls, and sometimes we are ourselves and admit that it is divine architecture. And here follows a poem. What is it to sail upon the calm blue sea, to ride as a cloud over the purple floor, with golden mists for company? And day and night are dressed ever in their jocund vest, and the water is warm to the hands, and far below you see motes of light by day, and streams of fire by night. What is it to sail upon the stormy sea, to drive with naked spars before the roaring gale, hemmed round with ragged clouds, foaming and hissing and thumping waves? The reeking cabin is cold and wet, the masts are strained and the sail is torn, the gale blows fiercer as the night sets in, scarce can the seaman aloft master his struggling reef. Even the stout captain in his coat of storms sighs as he glances astern at the white, white combs, and the passenger sits unsocial, and puts his book aside and leans upon his hand. Yet is the difference less between this grey sea and that golden one than twixt the moods of the man that sails upon it today and yesterday. What is a passenger? He is a much enduring man who bends under the load of his leisure. He fawns upon the captain, reveres the mate, but his eye follows the steward, scans accurately, as symptomatic all the motions of that respectable officer. The species is contemplative, given to imitation, viciously inquisitive, immensely capable of sleep, large eaters, swift digesters, their thoughts ever running on men and things ashore, and their eye usually squinting over the bulwark to estimate the speed of the bubbles. January 7th, west longitude 36 degrees 11, northern latitude 37 degrees 4. Sailors are the best dressed of mankind. Convenience is studied from head to heel, and they have a change for every emergency. It seems to me they get more work out of the sailor than out of any other craftsman. His obedience is prompt as a soldier's, and willing as a child's, and reconciles me to some dim remembrances of authority I wondered at. Thin skins do not believe in thick. Jack never looks an inch beyond his orders. Brace the yards, quoth the master. Aye, aye, sir, answers Jack, and never looks over the side at the squall or the sea that cometh, as if it were no more to him than to the capstan. But though I do not find much attraction in the seaman, yet I can discern that the naval hero is a hero. It takes all the thousand European voyages that have been made to establish our faith in the practicability of this our hodineural voyage. But to be Columbus, to steer west steadily day after day, week after week for the first time, and wholly alone in his opinion, shows a mind as solitary and self-subsistent as any that ever lived. I am learning the use of the quadrant. Another voyage would make an astronomer of me. How delicately come out these stars at sea! The constellations show smaller, and a ship, though with the disadvantage of motion, is a fine observatory. But I am ashamed of myself for a dull scholar. Every day I display a more astounding ignorance. The whole world is a millstone to me. The experiment of the philosopher is but a separation to bring within his optics the comprehension of a fact which is done masterly and in harmony in God's laboratory of the world. Wednesday, January 9th. west longitude 28 degrees 58. Still we sail well, and feed full, and hope tomorrow to make St. Mary's, the southernmost of the Azores. When the abbey grew rich, the fat monk cut up all his quills for toothpicks. So do we. Thursday eve at 9 o'clock past St. Mary's a dim, black hummock of land. Our dead reckoning agreed with its longitude and the bearings to a mile. January 13th. We have but 14 degrees of longitude to make to reach the Rock of Gibraltar, but the fickle wind may make those 14 longer measure than all we have meted. A gale day before yesterday, yesterday a heavy sea and a cold headwind today. Yet still we hope and drift along. In the ocean the vessel gains a large commission on every mile sailed, even with a wind dead ahead. In a narrow sea much less. A sea voyage at the best is yet such a bundle of perils and inconveniences that no person as much a lover of the present moment as I would be swift to pay that price for any commodity which anything else would buy. Yet if our horses are somewhat wild, and the road uneven, and lonely, and without inns, yet experience shows us that the coward eye magnifies the dangers. Sunday, west longitude 17 degrees 2. Let us insist on having our say. We but half express ourselves, but ever draw diagonals between our own thought and the supposed thought of our companion, and so fail to satisfy either. Now God made the model, and meant we should live out our idea. It may be safely trusted as proportionate and of good issues, so that it be faithfully expressed, but God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. And so it takes a divine man to exhibit anything divine. Socrates, Alfred, Columbus, Wordsworth, or any other brave preferrer of the still voice within to the roar of the populace, a thing very easy to speak and very hard to do for 24 hours. The rest are men potentially, not actually, now only pupas or tadpoles, say rather quarries of souls, heroes that shall be, seeds of gods. Sunday, January 13th. In the wonderful store of the memory carry we power and peace. It is the monument of how high antiquity. The sides of the pyramids cannot contain the story of half so much time, nor be inscribed with anything like the magic of its method. Its method is myriadfold. Its order comprehends 1,000 lines, right, left, oblique, curved, and waving. Every point lives, and its center or extreme in turn. As the lightning shineth out of one part of heaven, even unto the other part, so one thought in this firmament flashes its light over all the sphere. A man looks upon himself as a mere circumstance, and not as the solid adamant, mundane ground plan of a universal man. He thinks his internals are evanescent opal shades, and won't bear criticism and description. Let him turn the telescope on them. Let him compare them with durable things. He will find they outshine the sun, and will grind to powder the iron and the stone of outward permanence. January 14th, western longitude 14 degrees 14. Well, blithe traveler, what cheer? What have the sea and the stars and the moaning winds and the discontented thoughts sung in your attentive ears? Peeps up old Europe, yet out of his eastern main hospitably, ho? Nay, the slumberous old giant cannot bestir himself in these his chair days to loom up for the pastime of his upstart grandchildren, as now they come, shoal after shoal, to salute their old progenitor, the old Adam of all. Sleep on, old sire, there is muscle and nerve and enterprise enow in us, your poor spawn, who have sucked the air and ripened in the sunshine of the cold west, to steer our ships to your very ports and thrust our inquisitive American eyes into your towns and towers and keeping rooms. Here we come, and mean to be welcome, so be good now, clever old gentleman. I comfort the mate by assuring him that the sea life is excellent preparation for life ashore. No man well knows how many fingers he has got, nor what are the faculties of a knife and a needle, or the capabilities of a pine board, until he has seen the expedients and the ambidextrous invincibility of Jack Tar. Then he may buy an orchard, or retreat to his paternal acres, with a stock of thrifty science that will make him independent of all the village carpenters, masons, and wheelwrights, and add withal an enchanting beauty to the waving of his yellow corn, and sweetness to his shagbarks and his chimney corner. No squally 12 o'clock, call the watch, shall break his dreams. Tuesday, January 15th, western longitude 13 degrees 27. Calm, clear, warm, idle day. Holiday to the senses, rest to the sailor, vexation to the captain, dubiously borne by the passenger. Yesterday, or day before, saw 3 sail, 1 Englishman. Today 1 French brig, and saluted them both by exchanging the sight of our colors. John Bull, they say, is very sulky at sea, or assuredly sometimes very rude. But how comes my speculative pencil down to so near a level with the horizon of life, which commonly proses above? I learn in the sunshine to get in altitude and latitude, but am a dull scholar, as ever in real figures. Seldom, I suppose, was a more inapt learner of arithmetic, astronomy, geography, political economy, than I am, as I daily find to my cost. It were to brag much if I should there end the catalogue of my defects. My memory of history, put me to this pinch of a precise question, is as bad. My comprehension of a question in technical metaphysics very slow, and in all arts practic, in driving a bargain, or hiding a motion, or carrying myself in company as a man for an hour. I have no skill. What under the sun canst thou do then, pale face? Truly not much, but I can hope. In a good hope, said Bias, the wise differ from the unwise. I am content to belong to the great all, and look on and see what better men can do, and by my admiration realize a property in their worth. I did not put me here, yet God forbid I should therefore decline the responsibility into which I am born. Space and time and venerable nature and beautiful stars and all the various fellow beings, I greet ye well, and will not despond, but even out of my acre God shall yet rear himself some tardy fruit. If not, still is it not sublime unprofitably to pray and praise? Wednesday, January 16th. I rose betimes and saw every fold of the banner of the morning unrolled from starlight to full day. We are as poor as we are rich. We brag of our money, but in the lonely night watch it will not always befriend us, but leaves the scholar's brain as barren as the steward's. But that I sat in the confessional last night, I should parade my rags again. The good captain rejoices much in my ignorance. He confounded me the other day about the book in the Bible where God was not mentioned, and last night upon St. Paul's shipwreck. Yet I comforted myself at midnight with Lycidas. What markable beauty in that classic pastoral! I should like well to see an analysis of the pleasure it gives. That were criticism for the gods. The inconvenience of living in a cabin is that people become all eye. 'Tis a great part of well-being to ignorize a good deal of your fellow man's history, and not count his warts, nor expect the hour where he shall wash his teeth. January 17th. Latitude 36 degrees 29 north. Longitude 9 degrees 48 west. Another day as beautiful as ever shines on the monotonous sea, but a wind so soft will not fill our sails, and we lie like a log, so near our haven too. Looks like there are a few Greek words here that are not translated. The sea is a blank, and all the minstrelsy of nature rings but a few changes on the instrument. The more it should send us to the inner music, but that is a capricious shell which sometimes vibrates wildly with multitudinous impulses, and sometimes is mute as wood. The inner shell is like its marine archetype, which murmurs only where there is already noise. Friday, January 18th, latitude 36 degrees 36 north, longitude 8 degrees 20 west. Well, thou navigating muse of mine, 'tis now the hour of Chinese inspiration, the post-teacup time, the epical creative moment to all thinking heads of the modern world. And what print have the ethereal footsteps of night and morn left upon your tablets? Another day, profusion of the divine munificence, yet taken and spent by us as by the oysters. The boar feeds under the tree, and never looks up to see who shakes down the mast, and I glide in leisure and safety and health and fullness over this liquid Sahara, and the invisible leader, so venerable, is seldom worshipped, and much a stranger in the bosom of his child. We feel sometimes as if the sweet and awful melodies we have once heard would never return, as if we were deaf, and we fear we shall not again aspire to the glory of a moral life, of a will as punctual as the little needle in the binnacle over my head. The sea tosses on the horns of its waves the framework of habits so slight and epicurean as mine, and I make the voyage one long holiday, which, like all holidays, is dull. Saturday, January 19th. Memorandum. No trust to be put in a seaman's eye. He can see land wherever he wishes to see it, and always has a cloud and the stuff ready to cover up a mistake. No word suits the sea but I hope. Every sign fails. Straits of Gibraltar, January 20th. Last evening they saw land from the masthead, and this morn broke over the bold and picturesque mountains of Africa behind Cape Spartel and Tangiers. On the left was Cape Trafalgar in Spain. The passengers greeted each other and mused, each in his own way, on this animating vision. But now, as Tarifa light opened upon us, we have encountered an adverse current, a thing unknown in the books, or to the sailors in these waters, where they say the current always sets from the ocean into the Mediterranean. Meantime, all the other craft, great and small, are flying by us, and we seem anchored in the middle of the stream. What is this to me beyond my fellow feeling for the master? Shall not I be content to look at the near coast of Andalusia and Morocco? I have seen this morn the smokes of Moorish fishers or mountaineers on one side, and of Spanish on the other. We could not quite open Tangier Bay now to see that Mauritanian town, but the watch towers and the cultivated enclosures and the farmhouses of the Spaniard are very discernible. Not many weeks ago I should scarce have been convinced that I should so soon look on these objects, yet what is their poetry, or what is it not? Is not a hut in America a point that concentrates as much life and sentiment as a hut in Europe, or on a ragged side of a Mount Atlas? Ah, it is all in the anointed eye. Yet will not I refine overmuch on the love of the remote and the renowned, nor affirm them both to be only a mixture of colors upon the retina of the eye, nor say of a man, he is mammiferous, and of beauty, it is but gelatine and oxygen. January 21st. A squall with copious rain helped us out of our straits, and last evening I saw the lights of the barracks of Gibraltar on one side, and at Ceuta on the other. The summit of the hill at Gibraltar is 1,500 feet high. This day we sail bravely 5, 6, and 7 knots. Sunrise was charming, the pillars of Hercules astern, the Barbary coast on the lee quarter, and the mountains of Grenada covered with snow, having white villages halfway up their sides on the left hand. A grand show they make. The Sierra Nevada is the name of the range, and the easternmost summit which we saw is the highest in Spain, and except the Alps, in Europe, to wit, 11,690 feet. We glided by Malaga, the country of the finest grape, but were too far seaward to spy the town. 21 sail were in sight at sunrise. These cold alpine hilltops remind us of New England, though far higher than any of our snowbanks. Noble Sierra Nevada. All the afternoon we have watched the sublime peak of Cumbre de Malhojesen, and, fast as we go, we scarce change our bearings from it. January 22nd. Off the snowy mountains blew not so cold breath yesterday as this day from the northeast. Fire, well said the ancient, is the sauce of life. If you diminish the temperature, it infuses ague into my inner as well as outer self. Yet since the first 10 days of the voyage, I have scarce worn my great coat except at evening, or to sit still in the shade. January 25th. Latitude 37 degrees 31 north, longitude 1 degree 20 east. Headwinds are sore vexations, and the more passengers the sorer. Yesterday the captain killed a porpoise, and I witnessed the cutting up of my mammiferous fellow creature. When men and women sit mum by the hour and week, shall I doubt the doctrine that every natural character is interesting? By no means. There is always sweet music in the pipe, but it needs a skilful player to draw it out, else month by month we may be packed in the same closet, and shall be all only so much ash and ebony. If the sea teaches any lesson, it thunders this through the throat of all its winds, that there is no knowledge that is not valuable. How I envied my fellow passenger who yesterday had knowledge and nerve enough to prescribe for the sailor's sore throat, and this morning to bleed him. In this little balloon of ours, so far from the human family and their sages and colleges and manufactories, every accomplishment, every natural or acquired talent, every piece of information is sometime in request. And a short voyage will show the difference between the man and the apprentice as surely as it will show the superior value of beef and bread to lemons and sugar plums. Honor evermore aboard ship to the man of action, to the brain in the hand. Here is our stout master, worth 1,000 philosophers, a man who can strike a porpoise and make oil out of his blubber and steak out of his meat, who can thump a mutineer into obedience in 2 minutes, who can bleed his sick sailor and mend the box of his pump, who can ride out the roughest storm on the American coast, and, more than all, with the sun and a 3-cornered bit of wood and a chart, can find his way from Boston across 3,000 miles of stormy water into a little gut of inland sea, 9 miles wide, with as much precision as if led by a clue. Malta, February 2nd. Made St. Elmo's Light at 1 o'clock this morning. Lay to in a gale till daylight, and then sailed into St. Paul's Bay. The pilot boat was quickly followed by a procession of boats, who, after a short, loud wrangling with the unflinching captain, came into his terms and took the rope and brought us in. So here we are in Malta, in the renowned harbor of Marsa Muset, the quarantine roads for a fortnight, imprisoned for poor dear Europe's health, lest it should suffer prejudice from the unclean sands and mountains of America. The truth is, it is all pro forma on the part of the English government, this quarantine being enforced in accordance with the rules of Naples and Trieste, merely that vessels quarantined here may be admitted to full pratique in those ports. We were presently visited by the harbor master, then by the boats of the grocer and ship chandler presenting their cards at the end of a pole to us leprous men, then the clamorous spenditori to offer their services, then by the merchant, Signor Paul Enaud. This afternoon I visited the parlatorio, where those in quarantine converse with those out across barriers. It looked to me like the wildest masquerade. There jabbered Turks, Moors, Sicilians, Germans, Greeks, English, Maltese, with friars and guards and maimed and beggars. And such grotesque faces! It resembled more some brave antique picture than a congregation of flesh and blood. The human family can seldom see their own differences of color and form so sharply contrasted as in this house. I noticed, however, that all the curiosity manifested was on our part. Our cousins of Asia and Europe did not pay us the compliment of a second glance. In quarantine, our acquaintance has been confined chiefly to the Maltese boatmen, a great multitude of poor, swarthy, good-natured people who speak their own tongue, not much differing from the Arabic, and most of them know very few words of Italian and less of English. Harbor of Malta, Marsa Muset, February 3rd. Here in the precincts of St. John, the isle of old fame under the high battlements, once of the knights and now of England, I spend my Sunday, which shines with but little Sabbath light. Tout commence, as Pierre Bousset says. It is hardly truer of me at this point of time, when I am setting foot on the old world, and learning two languages, than it is of every day of mine, so rude and unready am I sent into this world. Glad, very glad, to find the company of a person quite the reverse of myself in all these particulars in which I fail most, who has all his knowledge, and it is much and various, at his sudden command. I seem, on all trivial emergencies, to be oppressed with a universal ignorance. If I rightly consider that for this point of time, which we call a life, tout commence, I shall rejoice in the omen of a boundless future, and not be chagrined. Oh, heavens, no! It is, however, a substantial satisfaction to benefit your companions with your knowledge, a pleasure denied me. Time, said friend Carlyle, brings roses, a capital mot, putting a little rouge on the old skeleton's cheek. February 10th. Perhaps it is a pernicious mistake, yet, rightly seen, I believe it is sound philosophy, that wherever we go, whatever we do, self is the sole subject we study and learn. Montaigne said himself was all he knew. Myself is much more than I know, and yet I know nothing else. The chemist experiments upon his new salt by trying its affinity to all the various substances he can command, arbitrarily selected, and thereby discloses the most wonderful properties in his subject. And I bring myself to sea, to Malta, to Italy, to find new affinities between me and my fellow men, to observe narrowly the affections, weaknesses, surprises, hopes, doubts, which new sides of the panorama shall call forth in me. Mean, sneakingly mean, would be this philosophy, a reptile unworthy of its name, if self be used in the low sense, but as self means devil, so it means God. I speak of the universal man to whose colossal dimensions each particular bubble can by its birthright expand. Is it the hard condition upon which the love of the highest truth is given, such extreme incapacity for action in common conversation as to provoke the contempt of the bystander, even of the kindred and debtors? Or is it that we will put off upon our nature the bad consequence of our faults? Hang out your temperance, my friend, as your amulet, your benevolence as your shield, your industry as your advocate, and perhaps you will not have so much reason as you think to complain of your reception among men. I am a full believer in the doctrine that we always make our own welcome. Malta, February. I am now pleased abundantly with St. John's Church in Valletta. Welcome these new joys. Let my American eye be a child's again to these glorious picture books. The chanting friars, the carved ceilings, the Madonnas and saints, they are living oracles. Quotidiana et perpetua. Silver gates. Louis de Beaujolais. You have one inner rule. You leave that and measure your actions by a laxer rule of others. In vain. They won't judge you by theirs, but will hold you to your own. Spite of themselves, they will find out and use that secret inner rule of yours, cobwebbed up in thickest darkness of nature as you thought. Everything intercepts us from ourselves. La Valletta, February 16th. Yesterday we took pratique and found lodgings once more on dry ground with great joy. All day with my fellow travelers I perambulated this little town of stone. It is from end to end a box of curiosities, and though it is very green and juvenile to express wonder, I could not hinder my eyes from rolling continually in their sockets, nor my tongue from uttering my pleasure and surprise. It is an advantage to enter Europe from the little end, so we shall admire by just degrees, from the Maltese architecture up to St. Peter's. I went to St. John's Church, and a noble house it is to worship God in, full of marble and mosaic and pictures and gilding. The walls are eloquent with texts, and the floor covered with epitaphs. The verger led me down into a dim vault full of solemn sculpture and showed me the tomb of La Isle Adam, the Grand Master of the Knights of St. John, to whom Charles V gave the island of Malta when he and his knights had been driven by the Turks from Rhodes. Next to him rests the body of La Valette, who so bravely defended the island against the Sultan. But I shall have more to say about this fine temple when I have paid another visit. Everywhere as I went, the wretched beggars would steal up beside me with "Grazie, signor, sono miserabile, uno grana per carota." Look hard at a Maltese, said my friend, Mr. H., and he instinctively holds out his hand. I went to the churches of St. Popilius and St. Thomas. The first is no other than Publius, the chief man of the island, in Acts 28, and much honor hath he in Malta, at least on the walls of his church. In all these churches there were many worshippers, continually coming in, saying their prayers, and going their way. I yielded me joyfully to the religious impression of holy texts, and fine paintings, and this soothfast faith, though of women and children. How beautiful to have the church always open, so that every tired wayfaring man may come in and be soothed by all that art can suggest of a better world when he is weary with this. I hope they will carve and paint and inscribe the walls of our churches in New England before this century, which will probably see many grand granite piles erected there, is closed. To be sure, there is plenty of superstition. Everywhere indulgence is offered, and on one convent on our way home I read this inscription over the gate, and it's a series of Latin words with no translation. "This is almost too frank, may it please your holiness." February 17th. Visited St. John's again and attended Mass. The bishop, a venerable old man, was present, but did not officiate. This noble temple was built by the Grand Master La Casiera, and chiefly adorned with painting by Preti, who lies buried here, Vita Abella. Mrs. Davy told me it was built about 1560. The lordly heads of the Grand Masters still command the eye in marble or on canvas around the walls, and their notched cross surmounts or underlies every ornament. The music of the organ and chanting friars very impressive, especially when we left the kneeling congregation in the nave and heard it at a distance as we examined the pictures in a side oratory. I went into several churches which were all well attended. How could anybody who had been in a Catholic church devise such a deformity as a pew? Went at 11 o'clock to Mrs. Temple's plain chapel on the third story of his dwelling house, and heard with greedy ears the English Bible read, and Watts's psalms sung, and a good sermon. A small congregation of English, one Armenian who was translating the Bible into his tongue. Mr. Temple and Mr. Halleck conduct the missionary press here and print in modern Greek, in Italian, in Armenian, and Turkish. The Maltese is Arabic with a mixture of Italian. They have translated Adams's Arithmetic and Peter Parley's Geography, and the best tracts into Greek. The names look odd enough, then here are a series of Greek words. Our droll masks for Scott's Force of Truth and the Dairyman's Daughter. I brought away Skougel's Life of God and the Soul of Man in Italian. The missionary press for the Mediterranean is established here for the sake of the protection of this government. There is only one protection, no countenance. It was a stipulation of the Maltese in their capitulation to the English in blank that the scriptures should not be printed in the Maltese. February 20th. I went to the terrace on the top of Mr. Temple's house. All the roofs are flat and afford this valuable accommodation. I saw many persons walking on the tops. Last Friday Mr. Temple said he saw Mount Etna very distinctly from hence, and it is very frequently seen. It is 150 miles distant. He is sure the atmosphere is much more transparent than with us. that Venus and Jupiter give more light. Mr. Temple rents his lofty house for $140, containing his chapel and press. I rented once for 1,000 scudi, equaling $400. Noble houses everywhere, thanks to the beautiful material for building which constitutes the soil of the island. The Maltese stone is very soft and easily wrought, and when well selected, the house will last 1,000 years. The architecture is in fine taste, the apartments 20 or 30 feet high, floors, walls, stairs, all of this cold, clean, sightly stone, the balconies supported with sculptured work, and the openings adorned with vases. Instead of paper, the walls and ceilings are covered with ordinary frescoes, wherein Aesop and the Old Testament furnish the subjects. Visited the armory in the palace, and saw the arms of the old knights of every form and size, much the same show, I suppose, as in the Tower of London. The hall might be 200 feet long. The library of the knights contains 40,000 volumes, and a venerable Ptolemaic bookstall it is. I sat down and read Abella's old folios, Melita Illustrata. Through the politeness of Mr. Ainaud, the American consul, I received a card of invitation from Sir Frederick Poninsby, the governor, to attend a fancy dress ball at the palace. A very gay and novel scene, but hardly equal to the place and expectation. As the consul did not appear very early, my friends and I presented each other to Sir Frederick, who conversed a few moments very pleasantly. We thought he resembled George IV. A few beautiful faces in the dancing crowd, and a beautiful face is worth going far to see. That which is finest in beauty is moral. The most piquant attraction of a long-descended maiden is the imputation of an immaculate innocence, a sort of wild virtue, if I may so term it, wild and fragrant as the violets, and the imagination is surprised and gratified with the strong contrast, meeting the divinity amidst flowers and trifles. The days pass over me, and I am still the same. The aroma of my life is gone, like the flower with which it came. Called upon Mrs. Davy, a very agreeable woman. Dr. Davy, brother to Sir Humphrey, is given to chemical pursuits. Much younger than I expected, and of simple manners. I was sorry I could not accept of their invitation to dine, as they were well named, well educated, well mannered, and well acquainted with Malta. Visited the workshop of Sigismundo Demek, a sculptor of Maltese stone. Beautiful work. If I had a great house in America, I would send to the signor for a pair of vases, which I saw, 4 feet high, 2 feet diameter, richly carved with ornaments, a la Raphael. Price, $8 apiece. Another pair of the same size and as good to my eye, though with less costly ornament. Price, $5. Venetian oil is put in them to make them hold water. A bocal, 1 foot high and beautiful, 75 cents. Vaso etrusco, $1. Convicts in chains sweep the streets in Malta. The Maltese milkman drives his goats through the street and milks you a pint at your door. Asses and mules pass him. February 21st. At 8 o'clock p.m. we embarked for Syracuse and a Sicilian brigantine, Il Santissimo Ecce Homo, and a most ridiculous scene our ship's company offered, they to us and we to them. The little brig was manned with 14 men, who were all on a perfect level with each other. The steersman sat down at the helm, and when they brought him his supper, the captain affectionately took his post whilst he ate. The boy was employed in sitting down by the steersman and watching the hourglass so that he might turn it when it ran out. But the whole interest of master and men was concentrated on us, his 5 passengers. We had hired for $30 the whole cabin, so they put all their heads into the scuttle and companionway to behold all that we did, and which seemed to amuse them mightily. When anything was to be done to sails or spars, they did it who had a mind to it, and the captain got such obedience as he could. In the morning the mate brought up his gazetteer to find Boston, the account of which he read aloud, and all the crew gathered round him whilst he read. They laughed heartily at the captain and passed jokes upon him, and when the little boy did something amiss, everybody gave him a knock. A cask of blood-red wine was on tap, from which everybody drank when it pleased him, in a quart measure. Their food was a boiled fish called purpo, which looks like an eel and tastes like lobster, with bread and green onions eaten raw. Their little vessel sailed fast, and in 16 hours we saw the ancient city of Syracuse. Abundance of fuss and vexation did the Sanita and the Dogana give us before we suffered to land our baggage, but our captain and mate helped us all they could, and our money opened all the gates at last. Sicily, Syracuse, February 23rd. Shall I count it, like the Berber at Rome, the greatest wonder of all to find myself here? I have this day drank the waters of the fountain Arethusa, and washed my hands in it. I ate the very fragrant Hyblean honey with my breakfast. I have been into the old temple of Minerva, praised for its beauty by Cicero, and now preserved and concealed by having its pillars half buried in the walls of the cathedral. A modern facade conceals the front, but the severe beauty of a Parthenon peeps from the sides in projecting flutes and triglyphs. It was 7 in the morning, and I found the priests saying Mass in the oratories of the church. The American consul called upon our party in the forenoon, and we rode with him into the country. We stopped at a crumbled arch, reputed as the spot where Cicero found the globe and cylinder, the tomb of Archimedes. Did I hold my breath for awe? Then we went to the catacombs old enough, nothing else, mere excavations in the living rock for cemeteries, but the air was soft and the trees in bloom, and the fields covered with beautiful wild flowers to me unknown, and amidst ruins of ruins nature still was fair. Close by we found the aqueduct which once supplied the magnificent city of Hiero, now turning a small grist mill. Then we went to Dionysus' ear, a huge excavation into the hard rock, which I am not going to describe. Poor people were making twine in it, and my ear was caught on approaching it by the loud noise made by their petty wheels in the vault. A little beyond the entrance, the floor was covered with a pool of water. We found a twine maker who very readily took us, one after another, on his shoulders into the recess, 250 feet, and planted us on dry land at the bottom of the cave. We shouted and shouted, and the cave bellowed and bellowed. The twine maker tore a bit of paper in the middle of the cave, and very loud it sounded. Then they fired a pistol at the entrance, and we had our fill of thunder. I inquired for the tyrant's chamber in the wall, the focus of sound where he was wont to hear the whispers of his prisoners, but in this unvisited country it is inaccessible. High up the rock, 70 or 80 feet, they pointed to a little inlet to which once there was a stair, but not now. If we had time and spirit, would we not go up thither in baskets, as sundry English have done? I affirm not. A little way off, along the same quarry of rock, we found another great excavation, in which they were making a saltpeter. It was the place from which the great pillars of the temple of Minerva, it is said, were taken. Then we visited the theater, or rather the rows of stone benches, which are all of it that remains. From this spot we looked down upon the city and its noble harbor, and a beautiful, sad sight it was. The town stands now wholly within the little peninsula, the ancient Ortygia, not a third of the size of the peninsula of Boston, I judge, and the 3 great suburbs, or parts, Napoli, Tyche, and Acradina, have almost no house or church where they stood. And Syracuse is very old and shabby, with narrow streets and few people and many, many beggars. Once 800,000 people dwelt together in this town. Its walls were, according to historical measurements, 22 English miles in circuit. Of its 2 ports, the northern was called the Marmaricus, because surrounded with marble edifices. The southern is 5 miles round, and is the best harbor in the Mediterranean Sea. In the old time, every Sicilian carried honey and wheat and flowers out of the port, and threw them into the sea as soon as he lost sight of the statue of Minerva aloft on her temple. Once Dion, once Timoleon, once Archimedes dwelt here, and Cicero dutifully visited their graves. I lodge in the Strada Amalfitana. In a cafe in our street, they have had the good taste to paint the walls in very tolerable frescoes with Archimedes drawing the famous galley by means of a windlass, and a sign over our locanda contains this sentence of Cicero's fourth oration in Verum: Urbum Syracusis elegrat. Was it grand or mournful that I should hear Mass in this temple of Minerva this morn? Though in different forms, is it not venerable that the same walls should be devoted to divine worship for more than 2,500 years? Is it not good witness to the ineradicableness of the religious principle? With the strange practice that these regions everywhere confounds pagan and Christian antiquity, and half preserves both, they call this cathedral the church of Our Lady of the Pillar. Abundance of examples here of great things turned to vile uses. The fountain, Arethusa, to be sure, gives name to the street, Via Arethusa, in which it is found, but an obscure dark nook it is, and we walked up and down and looked in this and that courtyard in vain for some time. Then we asked a soldier on guard where it was. He only knew that, quote, Questa alla batteria, nothing more. At last an old woman guided us to the spot, and I abhor to tell, the fountain was bubbling up its world-renowned waters within 4 black walls, serving as one great washing-tub to 50 or 60 women, who were polluting it with the filthy clothes of the city. It is remarkable now, as of old, for its quantity of water springing up out of the earth at once, as large as a river. Its waters are sweet and pure, and of the color of Lake George. All day from the balcony, Mount Etna is in sight, covered with snow. From the parlor window, I look down on the broad marshes where the Carthaginian army that came to rescue Syracuse from the Romans perished. They say in this country you have but to scratch the soil, and you shall find medals, cameos, statues, temples. February 24th. Visited the Latamy of the Gardens of the Capuchins, a strange place. It is a large and beautiful garden, full of oranges and lemons and pomegranates, in a deep pit, say 120 feet below the surrounding grounds. All this is a vast excavation in the solid rock, and we first came upon it from above and peeped down the precipice into this fragrant cellar far below us. Then follows a Latin quotation from Cicero, untranslated. All this excavation is manifestly the work of art, Cyclopean all. After circumambulating the brink above, we went to the convent and got admission to the garden below. A handsome and courteous monk conducted us and showed us one huge arch, wherein he said the Athenian prisoners recited the verses of Euripides for their ransom, wild and grand effect. All Syracuse must have been built out of this enormous quarry, traces of works on a vast scale in oldest time. Went into the convent, and the fathers set before us bread, olives, and wine. Our conductor then showed us the dormitories, over each of which was a Latin inscription from the Bible or the Fathers, the chapel, etc., of the house. There is no better spot in the neighborhood of Syracuse than the one they have chosen. The air, the view, the long gallery of the chambers, the peace of the place, quite took me, and I told the padre that I would stay there always if he would give me a chamber. He said I should have his, which he opened a little neat room with a few books, Theologia Thomas ex Carmis, and some others. My friend's whipcords hung by the bedside. There are only 22 or 23 persons in this fine old house. We saw but 4 or 5. I am half resolved to spend a week or fortnight there. They will give me board, I am informed, on easy terms. How good and pleasant to stop and recollect myself in this worn-out nook of the human race, to turn over its history and my own. But ah me! Hence we went to the Campo Santo, where several Americans have been buried, and thence to the other Latomy, the gardens of the Marquis de Casal, similar to those we had left, but the rich soil is now filled with flowers in wildest profusion of scent and color. The bergamot, lemon, the orange, the citron we plucked and ate, and lavender and rosemary and roses and hyacinths and jasmine and thyme, which were running wild all over the grounds, we filled our hands and hats with. Here we found the Marquisino, or son of the Marquise, who was very polite to us, and Mr. Baker, the English consul, and his family, whom we greeted warmly for the love of their fatherland and language. Well pleased, we came back to the Locanda, where we received the American consul, Signor Nicosia, and his friend, Signor Giuseppe Ricciardi, to dine. This is the end of Part 1 of Journal Collection Number 24 by Ralph Waldo Emerson. In the next video, we will continue with our journal entries starting on February 25th, while Emerson obviously is still in Italy. Thank you for listening.